Welcome to this month's Power Hour. My name is Ryan Kooiman, Director of Training, and today's topic is going to be complex electronic throttle relearns. Now, as a company this month, we're focusing our marketing and sales efforts on electronic throttle bodies and associated components. But one of the key elements of that is the relearn that's done afterwards. Quite often as technicians, I understand I've got a lot of gray hair here as a result of attempting to diagnose electronic throttle concerns. And it's difficult because they're very intermittent in nature. Not all of them come with a blown up gear set or a completely shorted out throttle position sensor. There's a lot of nuances and intermittence on that. So it's difficult to diagnose it, not so difficult to install the new one, but it's important that we do the relearn afterwards. A lot of times in the tech line, we get phone calls of technicians. I tried multiple throttle bodies, still not doing it. First question is, what relearn procedure did you follow? It's usually followed up by a long pause, and eventually I didn't do one. And so that's where we want to talk about that throughout the next half hour here. I've got a couple examples. We'll do a little demonstration here in the studio, and hopefully it'll prompt you all to look up the procedure next time. It's quite often found. You might have to do a little bit of digging, but we can find it in service information, and it's very crucial to clear out the old memory and then relearn the new position. So let's get started here. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about is the electronic throttle position system or electronic throttle control system as a whole. But you'll notice on the slide here, we call it the torque management system. And really that's what it's about. It's managing the torque of the vehicle from the engine delivered down to the wheels. And that comes into play with traction control, ABS stop events, etc. Used to be the driver would press on the throttle, or they'd call it the gas pedal back in the day, because it was mechanically connected to the carburetor or the throttle body at that point. Well, in today's vehicle, the driver is simply making a request. There's a lot of different inputs here to the vehicle, and the control module is going to make the command based on how much torque the driver requests, but also the optimum operating conditions for the vehicle itself. So, as the driver makes a request, as I mentioned, there's going to be a lot of different pieces here, but we've got components such as the ABS control module. Even the ABS wheel speed sensors are having input as to how well that throttle control system is going to operate and what the throttle blade will be commanded to. I'll never forget in one of our earlier throttle classes, we had a great case study in which multiple throttle bodies were replaced because they couldn't get the correct or the desired engine RPMs out of the vehicle. So it seemed like, well, let's replace the throttle body. The root cause of that entire failure was one faulty ABS speed sensor. The control module assumed that the left rear wheel was accelerating slower than the other three wheels, and so it put the vehicle into a torque limiting mode, preventing the throttle from opening properly. So just one of those things to keep in mind here. We're really working on the torque control system here. Now there's three main components to these systems here. So we've got our accelerator pedal position sensor, APP as we might call it. We've got the brains of the operation here being the control module, and then we've got the actual throttle body itself. So as we look at the APP, we've got the pedal assembly here. It's going to get mounted up to the firewall, and this is what the driver is going to be pressing on. Well, located in here is multiple sensors. And so some of the early ones may have had 3 sensors in it. A lot of the ones now today are going to have 2 pedal position sensors in here. It's going to be for a fail-safe mode. We don't want to just trust one. Remember the early days of the Prius where we had unintended acceleration? That was a whole new term that came out of this. And so we want to make sure that this is operating properly, that we're actually accelerating the vehicle or doing what the driver was asking for. Now these might be different types of sensors inside of here, but at the end of the day it's going to get converted and go back to the control module in a uniform message fashion here. So as we look at the throttle body itself, now these could come in multiple styles and flavors. So the one I've got in front of me here is kind of an older design, and so not that there's going to be an updated design for this particular vehicle, but this is going to be one of the early, like probably mid-2000s applications here. So we've got our throttle body. If we look on the side here, we've really got 2 wires going to the electrical motor. I grew up in the days of having the old stomper trucks, and we'd always take them apart, and it was a regular DC motor, 2 wires going to it. You reverse the polarity, it goes the opposite direction, kind of like a power window motor or a lot of electric motors that we see today. So we've got 2 wires to this electric motor here, but on this one, we've also got a standalone throttle position sensor. So this could be replaced. There might even be a little bit of adjustment on some of these applications. So there's multiple components to make this an electronic throttle body. A lot of the newer applications, we're gonna see ones that look similar to this, where everything is incorporated into the one side here. So you've got numerous more pins on the one side, and this incorporates the throttle position sensors as well as the motor. This is off a Chevy truck. We've also got an import application here, which you can see very similar. There's not the throttle position sensor on the side here. It's all incorporated into this big component here. Then the brains of the operation is here as the control module. And so the control module is going to receive the torque request, which is going to come from the customer ultimately pressing on the throttle pedal. It's going to calculate the torque application. It's going to look at the amplitude and rate of change here. How fast did they press it? Where are we at? There's a lot of different inputs here at this point. And then it's going to be an output device. It's going to make the command. So it gets the information, makes the command, sends the information out, and ultimately the engine will be generating the torque, which goes to the wheels here, accelerates the vehicle. So now we've reviewed the system a little bit here, we want to talk about when to do the relearns here. And so there's 3 main times when we're going to be doing the relearn here. Now, I'm not going to talk you out of just doing a relearn because it's a nice day. Go ahead and do the relearn. But we want to make sure that we're starting with a clean throttle body. So if you've done some service to the vehicle here, we're always going to recommend if you're cleaning a throttle body that you're going to take it off the vehicle, unplug it, apply it to a rag, and work your way around here. Make sure that the front and the back side are always good and clean. If you do this on the vehicle, you run the risk of the vehicle waking up and trying to close the throttle body with your finger in there. We never want that to happen. But it's also difficult to clean the backside accurately. So if you're doing a throttle cleaning, remember, this was coked up. There's a lot of carbon in here prior to the cleaning. And so the adjusted or the learned idle value is going to be much different than what it would be now. So if you clean it and don't do a relearn, you might end up with a high idle condition. You might even end up with a trouble code or the vehicle going into limp-in mode. So after cleaning, we want to do a relearn. If you've gone ahead and replaced the module, or you've even done a reflash for whatever reason, let's say there's a emissions-related update or a transmission-related update, if you've reflashed the module, we need to do a crank relearn and also do an idle relearn. Quite often, this has erased the memory. One little tip here, and I'll share it again throughout the presentation, there's been several times in my career where I couldn't get a vehicle to do a relearn properly, especially on GMs, or talked to a friend who works at the GM dealer, said, I've already got the scan tool plugged in, I gotta go out and clear out the memory. I'm just gonna go ahead and reprogram the module at that time also. So once in a while in some manufacturers, you're gonna have to do a reflash to force the relearn to start there. That's very few and far between, but sometimes it will have to be done. The third condition is if we replace any of these components, if we replace the APP, if we replace the electronic throttle body itself, we're going to need to do a relearn. Now, these are going to come as plug and play units. We don't have to install software in here. We don't have to code it. And that being said, there might be one example out there or something. Feel free to make a comment there in the comment bar or type it in the questions, if you will, and we'll address it later on in the presentation. But everyone that I've ever run across in every scenario I can think of, the throttle body comes plug and play. It's ready to go. But it's the vehicle that we have to recognize that, hey, you're used to seeing this thing. It had a problem. It was sick. It was plugged up. There was some problem with it. We've replaced it with a new unit. We need to go back and teach you, the control module, what the operating parameters are going to be on that particular one. That's when we definitely have to do the relearn there. So I'm always going to recommend that you look in service operation or service information here to determine when to do this and what it takes to do it on the particular vehicle. I know when it comes to General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, et cetera, a lot of technicians are very comfortable with those and just go, okay, I'm gonna bolt it on, see what happens. Maybe take it for a test drive. Well, again, I'm gonna encourage you to always look up the procedure there. So you see on the screen, I just this morning even looked up the procedure. I've got a 2018 Chevy Silverado in the studio here with me today. And so there's a couple different ways to get at this. If you go under electronic throttle actuator, and then you can click on that, it'll usually show the removal and installation procedure. There's quite often a hot link at the end of that, which will take you to the Relearn procedure. Or if you look at control module, initialization and relearns, you can get to the same place here. So it tells you really when to do it. There's conditions for running the procedure, and then it talks your way through here. So it's going to tell you on most of these, obviously we need to clear out the old configuration here, and we're going to have the scan tool plugged in, and we're going to be resetting the throttle body idle airflow compensation. Now we wanted to go back to 0%. Remember, as I mentioned, with some of these older units, it's gonna, over time, through wear and tear, carbon buildup, et cetera, it's gonna learn its new compensation value. And just like fuel trims, a lot of these vehicles will relearn its own or build its own known table of idle air compensation and how much further it has to open that throttle blade to keep the desired idle speed. So, on this particular vehicle, once we've done this, we need to go into the scan tool and we need to clear out the information and go with it. So I'm gonna jump in this truck here a second. And I've already got the information pulled up. I've got the vehicle powered up here. And so there's a couple different ways you can go in through hot tests, but on this particular one, I'm in the engine control module. I'm gonna select special function. You can see we can do the brake pedal position sensor learn, fuel trim resets, a lot of different stuff here, but we're gonna focus on idle learn. So we're establishing vehicle communications, and so you can see idle learn uncommanded. Compensation value is already at 0. Just so I didn't get caught here on camera, I already actually went ahead and did this, but initially this showed a value of 8. And so I would take the scan tool and I'm gonna press the learn button here. And you see it says in progress, and then it says learn. Well, they forgot the ED, but it is actually learned. At this point, it is relearned the new throttle body idle airflow compensation. It's at the 0 value, and so we can back out of it. It's always a good idea to go into live data at this point. We're gonna definitely take the truck for a test drive, make sure that it's operating properly and run it through several drive cycles before handing it back to the customer. But hopefully you see just how straightforward it can be on one of these GMs if we use the right tool. Now I've attempted this. In this particular one, I'm using Autel. Earlier today, the technicians on the other side of the wall here actually did it with a top down. We've done it with Snap-on, we've done it with GM factory tools, et cetera. So most of today's tools on newer General Motors, and really most vehicles for that matter, they have the functionality built into it there. So just kind of a general rule of thumb, if you're not using a scan tool, which I hope you are, one of the just standalone rules that General Motors has stood by for years is clear, keep alive memory. It's a Ford term, I understand, but we want to clear out the memory there, and now we need to idle the vehicle for 2 minutes, fully warmed up, in park with the AC off. Then we're going to turn the AC on for 2 minutes. Then we're going to put the vehicle in drive with our foot on the brake, and we're going to idle it for 2 minutes with the AC off, and then again for another 2 minutes with the AC on. And that should relearn the major idle commands. Now we're gonna take the vehicle for a test drive, do a couple throttle close decels to ensure that everything is working properly. Now if we go over to Ford, again, straightforward procedure done in the scan tools there. However, Ford has different parameters. And this morning, we actually did a relearn on a 2015 3.5 liter EcoBoost. Straightforward. Ford has what's referred to as FMEM, failure mode, engine management modes. And so when there's a problem with the throttle system, whether it be an APP or a throttle position sensor, it's going to go into various modes of limp-in mode. Some are more severe, get your attention more than others. And so we need to clear that out. We need to say we fixed the problem. So we're going to clear out the keep alive memory on the Ford here. And then very similar to the GM, we're going to idle it for 2 minutes in each of these particular modes, take it for a test drive, and verify that it's working properly. Now it gets interesting as we start going into some of the Asian manufacturers here. Manufacturers such as Nissan, it gets a little more difficult. On the newer ones, I'm going to use a scan tool every single time. And for that matter, every time I can, I'm going to be using a scan tool on all of these vehicles working through the procedure. However, that's not always the case. Some of the older scan tools or the early OBD2 applications around the year 2000, there was much more difficult procedures here, and not everybody had the functionality built in their scan tool. And so this is probably one of the more historic, difficult relearns known to the automotive technician world here. So if we can't use a scan tool, one of the first things we need to do is disconnect the battery and reconnect it. And we're going to recommend doing that for at least 90 seconds. Now I know quite often we don't like disconnecting the battery because we lose a lot of other memory functions here. Nissan is very clear. I just double checked it again about a half hour before starting this presentation that it's important that the battery be disconnected. We want all the memory wiped out of this particular one. I'm going to reconnect the battery and then turn the key on, engine off for 10 seconds. And then we need to go through some of these different values here. We're going to do a APP relearn. We're going to do a throttle valve closed position learning function, idle air volume learning function. And again, if we can do it with a scan tool, we want to do it with a scan tool. Because if we've replaced just one component, or even after cleaning the throttle body, I'll never forget it. I ran into that myself. After cleaning the throttle body, the vehicle had all kinds of drivability concerns and check engine light coming on. And so I was forced to do this procedure. And yes, I had to do the procedure numerous times in order to get it to work here. And so when I say the conditions must be right, very much mean that the conditions must be right. One of the conditions here is that the engine RPMs have to be within a certain specification. In different years, different models, those specifications change. But if the idle's too high, which it is in many of these cases, and that's why we're doing this relearn, the procedure will not start. And so I've had to use a clipboard to kind of choke off the throttle opening, pretend I'm my own throttle. So with almost choking the throttle out with that clipboard, now I was able to bring the engine RPM down. Manufacturers themselves will actually recommend unplugging different fuel injectors to get the engine to misfire and run rough enough that the engine RPM is within the range so that it can actually start the testing function or the relearn function. So it's important that we understand that and pay attention to that if the engine idle is too high. Now, if we look at this particular chart here, it's graphed out, and you kind of have to look at it line by line. And so the engine, first we're going to do a lot of functionality here, and that's going to be part of the APP relearn here with the engine not running. And so you can see the key off and then on. Then you're going to see we're going to have to do some pumping of the throttle here. We're going to see the check engine light go on. We're going to see it go off. And so we'll call this the hokey pokey here. And this has got to be very accurately timed to the point where if we're going to do this, I'm going to recommend that you always have a stopwatch on hand. And so to illustrate that, we've gone ahead and asked one of our techs here, Robbie, to go ahead and do this. So we've pre-recorded this, we've put the stopwatch in there. This is actually available on our Standard Brand YouTube channel. You can take a look at it and follow along. I've actually done this myself of using the video to follow along step by step. So let's take a look at Robbie doing the procedure here.
Today we're at the shop working on a 2003 Infinity G35 where we've just replaced the electronic throttle body. After replacing this, now we need to perform the idle air volume learning procedure. Now there's two ways to perform this learning procedure, one with a scan tool and one without a scan tool. Today we're going to do this learning procedure without a scan tool. So let's take a look at that procedure. So we're in the car and we've got our service information system open. And there are two procedures that we need to perform before we can perform this idle volume relearn. That is the accelerator pedal release position learning and the throttle valve closed position learning. All right, so we're going to do the accelerator pedal position learning first. The accelerator pedal needs to be in the fully released position. Now, important thing to note is if there are any accelerator pedal position codes or throttle position codes present, then this procedure will not learn. It won't work. All right, so let's get started with this pedal position learning. Now, it may be useful to use a stopwatch on your phone because you're going to have to time some procedures here. So we're just going to go ahead and start the stopwatch. Accelerator pedal is in the fully released position. We're going to turn the key on for 2 seconds. Turn the key off for 10 seconds. Turn the key on for 2 seconds. And then turn the key off for another 10 seconds. Okay, with that procedure completed, let's move on to the throttle valve closed position learning. We'll start this procedure with the accelerator pedal released. We'll turn the ignition on. And then we'll turn the ignition off for at least 10 seconds. And then during this 10 seconds, we're going to listen for the throttle movement. Okay, all right, we're good to go. Now that we've got the accelerator pedal position and throttle valve closed position learned, we're going to start the engine and let it heat up to operating temperature. Before we start, we need to prepare the vehicle. We need to make sure that the battery and the charging system are in good condition, the engine at operating temperature, the transmission in park. The electrical loads need to be turned off. This includes the blower motor, headlamps, rear defrost, and any other electrical loads. The steering wheel needs to be in the straight ahead position. We need to be stopped and the transmission warmed up. Now once the engine is at operating temperature, we'll shut the key off and wait at least 10 seconds. And next, with the accelerator pedal released, we'll turn the key on and wait 3 seconds. Now we're going to depress and release the accelerator pedal 5 times within 5 seconds. We'll wait 7 seconds now, and then we'll fully depress the accelerator pedal. We'll do this while we watch the service engine soon light. All right, after a few seconds, the engine light will start flashing. And once the light turns on, we'll release the pedal, start the engine, and let it run. So after about 20 seconds of idle, we're going to rev the engine up a few times and make sure that the idle returns back to normal. And now the idle learn is complete.
Thank you very much, Robbie. We definitely appreciate that walkthrough there, and hopefully you find that beneficial yourself. And so this is used on a lot of the early 2000s, late 90s Nissans. So if you ever run into one of those situations, follow along or look it up on our Standard Brand YouTube channel and do the procedure yourself. Now, as we get into other manufacturers such as Honda, one of the key things we're going to be doing here is going into the ECM. There's a reset ECM PCM function with a scan tool, and so we're going to clear out the memory. Again, over time, these things have learned a lot of bad information or learned the new learned value. They were adapting to the conditions they were given. And so we need to let them know, hey, you were adjusting for that problem. We've fixed the problem. We've put a new component in now. You need to learn the new values here. So we get rid of the old memory, and then we're going to turn the key on, engine off for 2 seconds or above. This is not as finicky as what we had with the Nissans. So it can be 30 seconds, it can be a minute, as long as the battery stays charged up there. It's got to be more than 2 seconds. Now we're going to start and run the engine at 3,000 RPM until the cooling fan runs. So hopefully you're in a well-ventilated area or you've got the shop exhaust system hooked up to it. We don't want to do this in a sealed off room here, but we're going to run it for up to 3,000 RPM until the cooling fan comes up, and then we're going to let off the throttle, and we're just going to let the vehicle idle in the bay for up to 5 minutes. Of course, we're going to take it for a test drive, hopefully do up to 2 closed throttle decelerations from 35 miles an hour down to 0, and that should do the relearn procedure on a Honda. Toyota is very similar. I was actually looking at pulling in one of our hybrid Venzas here this morning to do it, but the procedure is very similar to what we just talked about with the Honda. We need to clear the PCM memory. We're basically going to let the vehicle start and idle in the bay here until the cooling fan comes on, letting us know that the vehicle is completely warmed up. Then we're going to take the vehicle out for a test drive, do the closed throttle decels there as well, and we're good to go. So not a whole lot of complexity here on some of these manufacturers, but again, if it's in the scan tool, I'm done working on the vehicle, I'm always going to go one step further and do the relearn with the scan tool if I can. Obviously take the vehicle for a test drive and ensure that the system is performing the way it is. We don't want the customer to be doing the verification for us. So one of the final manufacturers I'm going to show you here today is Volkswagen. Now Volkswagen's got a couple different systems here, and they've done some different throttle control iterations over the years. And so I'm going to talk to you about them as systems 1, 2, and 3. Most of the ones we're going to see in the last 20 years are going to be type 3 here. But VW is a different character in many different ways here. When a throttle system is going faulty or we got an APP problem, there's going to be different symptoms that we see on Volkswagens that we don't see with different manufacturers here. So obviously a surging or a stalling at idle, quite often a hard start. The customer might have put their foot on the throttle, which they never do on a fuel injected engine here. But then VW is going to have some significant shifting concerns on an automatic transmission vehicle. We might see the check engine light come on. There's a slew of trouble codes, which we might see that with other manufacturers as well. We'll see the check engine light. The unique one here is that the air conditioning is not going to work properly under 2,500 RPM if there's an APP fault. And so that definitely gets a lot of people's attention there. So VW, if we look up service information, many times it's going to spell out the same thing we see at other manufacturers. When should we do the relearn? Well, if the vehicle's battery's been disconnected and reconnected for any reason or replacement, the ECU has been removed and reinstalled, the throttle body has been cleaned or removed and then reinstalled, or the accelerator pedal has been removed and installed. Not necessarily even replaced, but if it's been removed and reinstalled. If you're familiar with VWs, you know they've got their additional little kickdown relearn procedure that needs to be done with the transmission there also. So a couple tips here in order to get the relearn procedure to initialize and start. Not that much different than other ones. We need to clear the memory from the ECM. The battery voltage needs to be at least 11.5 volts. Throttle must be at the idle position the entire time. Throttle body needs to be clean and moving freely. And coolant temp needs to be between 5 and 95 degrees Celsius. They give you quite the wide range there, so that's not too difficult. So if we've got a type 1 and type 2, and let me quickly explain on those. You know, I even showed you some different iterations of throttle body designs throughout the years here. Now what I'm referring to as a type 1 on VW, they're going to have an electronic throttle motor and a throttle position sensor, but also they will have the cables on it. And so it's kind of a hybrid design. We've seen that on GM in the early 2000s, Ford as well. And so that's gonna be the type 1. Type 2 would look similar to this. It's fully drive-by-wire, but it's got the individual components on it. So this is using a scan tool. On these, my tool of choice has been always the Rostec VAGCOM or the VCS DS. And so key on engine off, we're gonna go into the engine control module. And then if you're familiar with this tool or with working on VW and Audi vehicles, you're familiar with the measuring blocks and basic settings. So we're gonna go into group 8 and then group 98 within that. And then we select go, which is going to switch it to basic settings. And so on the top right, it will say adaptation run. And you'll actually hear the throttle body moving around. And so within about 30 seconds, you should be done hearing things move along and let it learn there. Obviously make sure that the vehicle is key and engine off and not running at that time. So if we look at the screen here, I grabbed a screen capture the other day of doing one of these older vehicles here. And so if you look, we're in group 98 on the left-hand side there. If you look over to the right-hand side, you can see that when it's done, it says adaptation okay. And so we've learned our new throttle position 1 and 2 on this particular one. Now, if you've got a newer VW, which is always gonna be the Type 3, it's gonna be very similar, but instead of going into group 98, we're gonna enter into group 60. So you feel a little bit like a computer person here, and you're going behind the scenes and going into these different groups. If you're looking for this information, and take my word for it, or don't take my word for it, Rostech always has a fantastic Wikipedia page with a lot of this type of information on there, screen captures, etc. So Rostech Wiki, look it up, and you'll find that. Very similar procedure here, and you'll see I'm in group 60 instead of 98 on this particular one. So very similar procedure on that particular one. So just like that, that kind of brings us to the end of our time here. And so complex throttle relearns don't necessarily have to be that complex if you follow the instructions to a T. Just like we see with many other systems like ADAS or cam crank relearns. The information's there, we just have to take the time to go look for it, and we have to follow it specifically. Many times it's gonna be given to us on our scan tool. I'm always gonna use the scan tool as much as I can. If that fails me, I might have to go back and do the manual procedure if needed. But we always want to make sure that the vehicle is operating properly before we give it back to the customer. So a couple of my final takeaways here. Make sure we always clear out the old memory. It learned a learned value or a idle compensation mode if we're looking at this GM world here. And you learn that based on a dirty throttle or a faulty throttle. We need to say, get rid of that, start fresh. Always, again, look up the procedures, take the time to do that. It'll save you time in the long run. And some of these are gonna require some programming, not because of the component you're replacing, but because of the module itself. Might need to go one step further and actually reprogram the control module to clear out all the memory. We've seen that in General Motors in many years, even some Chryslers, where you can't clear out the adaptive memory in the transmission. So we have to go back in and program the module, wipe out all the memory, and then force it to relearn the new values based on the new components. All right, well, before I completely wrap stuff up here, Corey, do we have any questions? I've seen a little bit of chatter going on here on the side.
We do, and I knew this one was going to come in, Ryan, when you started talking about Nissan. So I'll throw this one out there to you first. Okay, what do you do when the Nissan Relearn doesn't go properly? I remember you said you had to do it a few times yourself on one. So what do you do when it doesn't work?
Try again. That's there's one of them I probably did at least 4 times. And this isn't a quick little procedure. It's frustrating, you're under the gun. Hopefully the customer's not waiting for the vehicle. You're starting to question your diagnosis. You're starting to question the component you just installed on the vehicle. But do it again, do it again, do it again. Those are very specific, as mentioned, that we've got to have the timer exactly on with that one. If all else fails, hopefully there's a cliff nearby and the car disappears or something like that. But no, just joking on that one. But it's, yeah, I've never gotten one that I couldn't do, but it took multiple attempts. So be diligent.
All right. Well, and this is a good one too, because I know you talked. Technology has changed on ETBs. Today, are there very many situations where you don't need to do a relearn?
Yeah. Yeah, and I see my buddy Tim asked that, and he and I actually talked about this recently. So thanks for setting me up here, pal. In the disagreement we had on that was sometimes you'll put it on and the vehicle runs fine. My take on this is just do the relearn. It's part of the procedure. It's the textbook answer, if you will. But that way we can give the vehicle back to the customer and it's working fine. And I feel comfortable. I'm asleep well at night knowing that it's still going to be working fine for the customer. Recently had this with even lift gate actuators on a Tahoe. Well, it works perfectly fine. Why do I have to do the relearn procedures? Well, let's do it. I don't want the customer to pick it up and they're at the grocery store and something doesn't work properly. So if there's a relearn available for any component, let's go ahead and do it. Show our professionalism. And sorry about that one, Tim.
Well, I got one more here for you in it because you went through quite a few manufacturers, but somebody is really wanting some more information on Hyundai because they're saying, what about Hyundai? Have you ever done a relearn on those?
I have done a relearn on a Hyundai, and actually a 3.5 liter Hyundai Azera we've got sitting out in the parking lot here too. And so in preparation for these sessions, I'll look up, I'll go out and I'll do the relearns there. That one is very straightforward. A lot of times with Hyundai I've found, you simply clear the memory and then it's key off, key on for a period of time, and then turn it off and then eventually start the vehicle. And so again, I verified that under throttle replacement. If you look at the bottom of the installation procedure on that application, it gives a little note, and it also has an asterisk and says these 2 trouble codes will be set if you do not do the relearn procedure on that particular one. So again, that can be very frustrating. We bolt a new component on, now all of a sudden we've got the same trouble codes or new trouble codes. Many times it's just because we have to force the control module to learn that there's a new component there. So that's it.
That's it. I'm going to let you take us out here, Ryan.
Fantastic. So if you're looking for more information on this, as I mentioned, go to our YouTube channel. That relearn that Robbie did, we've got posted on there now. We've got additional tips. We've got additional relearn procedures. And so you can see on the screen here, just typed in throttle body, and we've got playlists. We've got just a lot of good information available on our YouTube channel. If you're looking more about our program, you can see we've got a lot of components here. We've got great coverage for all makes and models here. And so go to standardbrand.com. If you click on the products tab on the top there, you'll see electronic throttle bodies on the drop down. You can click on that. You can look up the application you're working on, or you can find out more about our program, which is all new throttle bodies. We're not remanufacturing these, but we're actually putting new ones in the box and including many of the associated components, such as the gasket there. So again, I appreciate you coming out today. Look forward to seeing you next month. Actually, Louie will be here in the studio doing next month's, but always go to our YouTube channel. If you missed some of these, you can watch the previous ones, and also on our site, you can sign up for all the future ones too. Thank you very much.